Welcome to Does It Matter by Brainy Ballers, where we dissect the game with cutting-edge analytics to give you the upper hand. We analyze everything from hand sizes to average depth of targets to uncover hidden trends that no one else sees. Say goodbye to guesswork and hello to data-driven domination. Because here at Brainy Ballers, we don't just watch the game, we understand it. So get ready, it's podcast time.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really interesting question from your sources. Does pure athleticism, specifically this thing called relative athletic score, or R.A.S., does it actually predict how well a wide receiver does in fantasy football? Our mission today is to kind of cut through all the data, see if those combine numbers really tell us who's going to, shine on Sundays.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, I think, is how R.A.S. works. It breaks down a player's physical stuff, speed, agility, explosiveness, size, too, and it boils it all down into just one single score, 0 to 10. Makes it easy to compare.
Right.
It was developed by Kent Lee Platt back in 2013. The whole point was to give a quick visual look at athletic potential. So yeah, we're going to explore if that potential really turns into fantasy points.
Okay, let's dig into how this study actually approached it then. The researchers looked specifically at NFL draft combine numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they collected R.A.S. data for the top 50 fantasy football PPR finishers every season to 2003. And they were pretty clear. They defined bottom 10 as finishers 41 through 50 each year. Gives us a solid comparison point.
Exactly. And initially, they started with what they called an averages chart. They compared different groups, like the top 5 finishers, top 10, top 20, and so on. And surprisingly, looking at the averages, there wasn't really an obvious trend. No clear pattern in the average R.S. scores. But then they switched gears. They moved to a differences chart, looking for specific thresholds, like are there certain R.A.S. scores that pop up more often? And that's when they started to notice something. Top finishers did seem to have higher R.A.S. scores at a slightly higher rate. It was, an interesting first clue.
Right. Okay, now this is where it starts getting really compelling for you, the listener. The study zeroed in on what seemed like a potential sweet spot. So they looked at 150 of those bottom 10 players, 2003 all the way to 2023. And about 43.3% of them had a R.A.S. between 8.4 and 10. But then they looked at the top 10 finishers, 170 of them over that same period, and almost half, 48.8%, were in that same 8.4 to 10 R.A.S. range. That's a 5.5% jump in how often it occurred among the elites.
Yeah, exactly. And they refined it even more. They looked specifically at the 8.5 to 10 R.A.S. range. And that range, it showed up 8.2% more often in top 10 fantasy finishers compared to the bottom 10 guys. So, that definitely suggested, okay, maybe there's an optimal range here for high-level performance if R.A.S. is actually predictive.
Right, because seeing a pattern isn't the same as proving a connection.
Precisely. As any good deep dive knows, just because two things happen together doesn't mean one causes the other.
Yeah.
These surface trends can sometimes fool you.
Exactly. So those initial percentages looked promising, right? Hinting at that sweet spot. What was the critical next step? How did the researchers really try to, prove or disprove that link?
That's the key question. And the answer came from regression testing. It's a robust statistical method. Regression testing basically helps figure out if changes in one thing, like R.A.S. score,
reliably predict changes in another thing, like fantasy points. It goes beyond just averages or percentages to see if there's a real consistent pattern. And despite those interesting numbers they saw earlier,
yeah.
Do you want to start dominating your drafts? At brainyballers.com, we've researched every metric under the sun for you to find which ones are best linked to fantasy points. You can access hundreds of metrics to sharpen your scouting ability so you know which metrics matter and which are just noise. Stop guessing on which thresholds to look for within each metric. Big numbers can be misleading or irrelevant. Our Ultimate Athlete Blueprints reveal essential scouting metrics, their importance, and benchmarks within each metric that help predict a player's probability of being a success or bust. Elevate your scouting ability with Brainy Ballers' Ultimate Athlete Blueprints today. Click the link in the description. Now back to the show.
The Pearson value they calculated was just 0.014.
And for people who maybe aren't stats wizards, what does a Pearson value tell us? Why is that number so insignificant here?
Right. So a Pearson value measures how strong a linear relationship is between two things. It goes from -1, which is a perfect negative link. One goes up, the other goes down.
Got it.
To plus 1, a perfect positive link they move together. 0 means basically no linear connection at all, and 0.014, that's incredibly close to 0.
So 0.014 is basically flatline, no connection.
Pretty much, yeah. No real linear correlation.
And just to give that some context, they compared it to QB draft capital, right? Like how high a quarterback gets drafted. And everyone kind of accepts that does matter for a QB's fantasy outlook.
And that relationship, it has a Pearson value of negative 0.219, which shows a clear, pretty strong link.
Yeah.
So the contrast with R.A.S. is just stark. One shows a real predictive relationship, the other basically nothing.
Exactly. So pulling it all together, the big picture is R.A.S. gives you insight into raw athletic potential, no doubt. But this study found it showed essentially no correlation to actual fantasy football success for wide receivers. They even checked by decade just to see if maybe it became more important recently. And while that 8.510 threshold was slightly more significant in the last decade, overall, still no real correlation.
Wow, what a dive that was. So while that 8.5 to 10 R.A.S. range did pop up a bit more often in the top fantasy guys, the big takeaway is crystal clear. This study found R.A.S. just doesn't correlate with fantasy success.
Right.
So for all the hyper on combine numbers, maybe we're chasing ghosts a bit if we're banking on pure athleticism alone for fantasy points.
It's a really powerful reminder, isn't it? Raw athleticism, it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Think of it like a car. It can have amazing specs on paper, super fast, great engine. But if the driver can't handle the track or doesn't know the plays or maybe the coaching isn't there, it's not going to win. It's just not a definitive predictor on its own.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for you, the listener, here's a final thought to kind of mull over. If pure athleticism, like R.A.S. measures, isn't the key predictor for a wide receiver's fantasy success, what other factors do you think are actually more crucial? What turns that potential into real points on the field?